Lupin the Third, Strange Psychokinetic Strategy is the theatrical film debut of Lupin and also the first of 3 live-action Lupin adaptations to date. Directed by Takashi Tsuboshima and written by Hiroshi Nagano, it was released to Japanese theaters in 1974 by Toho, and as far as I can tell, it didn't make a big splash in Japan. I mean, I'm only assuming here since I can't find any box office numbers for Strange Psychokinetic Strategy, or hell, any other real information, i.e. with verifiable sources, about the movie besides its cast and crew. For the first theatrical Lupin film and first live-action Lupin story, you'd think it'd be more of a high-profile release, but as it is, it's relatively obscure even within the Lupin franchise. I imagine most in the West have probably never heard of this one, or if they have, they haven't seen it. It wasn't released in North America until 2006, when Discotek released a DVD copy of the film, which is currently out of print. Discotek is famous now for its incredible work crafting physical releases of the Lupin series for North American audiences, but did you know that this was the first official Lupin movie they released? Yeah, I was shocked to find that out, and I'm super curious as to why. Likely it has a lot to do with the ongoing legal issues regarding the estate of Maurice LeBlanc I alluded to in the Lupin history video, as this DVD came out before Arsène Lupin entered the public domain. This might have been the easiest and/or cheapest Lupin movie for Discotek to get the rights for, considering how TMS and Toho have essentially forgotten all about this one. The DVD itself is very bare bones, only containing the movie, its trailer, some production stills that don't provide much of anything, and some liner notes by LupinTheThird.com editor Reed Nelson. Just from the front cover, you can already see that this is gonna be a silly little romp, and yeah, that's kinda hitting the nail right on the head. Strange Psychokinetic Strategy doesn't really have an overarching story, instead showing a couple of short adventures that form a loose narrative. It starts with Lupin meeting Fujiko for the first time, then meeting Jigen and learning about the Lupin Empire that he's set to inherit although he doesn't want to, then Lupin escaping Zenigata, then Lupin and Fujiko stealing some jewels, then a crime syndicate called the Macaron Gang sends a bunch of assassins after him, some of whom pose as nuns played by the band Poppy, so of course they perform a musical number, then Lupin turns himself in because of all the assassination attempts and then just kind of escapes, then the Macaron Gang wants to take a bunch of clay figures containing diamonds that apparently have psychokinetic powers, then they capture Fujiko, they have a standoff with Zenigata and the police, then Lupin rescues Fujiko and takes the clay figures away but accidentally leaves them behind at a research lab dedicated to Psyonk. The police thank him for delivering the statues and then the movie just kinda ends. It is perhaps the most basic and simplistic Lupin story ever constructed, which makes sense as it had the responsibility of introducing film audiences to the Lupin formula. Rather than adapt chapters from the manga or develop a full narrative, Hiroshi Nagano assembled a screenplay that gives us some of the fundamentals of a Lupin adventure while eschewing others either for time or just not being able to weave them in successfully. There's no Goemon, for example, so those of you who love him will be disappointed, although, I don't know, maybe this is supposed to be Goemon? But beyond that, many of the building blocks that make Lupin the Third entertaining are also missing. There's absolutely no mystery to unravel, very little character relationship study, and the main treasure of the film isn't revealed until an hour in, and even then, it plays no part in how the climax unfolds. You can replace the clay figures with any other object and it'd serve the same narrative purpose, a MacGuffin to end all MacGuffins. Instead of plot, Strange Psychokinetic Strategy doubles down on the comedy with irreverent slapstick all throughout the runtime. It plays similarly to the Pink Panther movies, mixed in with some Three Stooges and It's a Mad 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 World for good measure. In many ways, it feels more like a parody of James Bond rather than an adaptation of Lupin, and that somewhat makes sense as the original manga took inspiration from the famous spy as well. The filmmakers take advantage of camera and editing effects in addition to its gag-centric writing, with shenanigans like Lupin freeze-framing in the middle of a jump and Zenigata teleporting up to Lupin's face. It looks very dated now, of course, but considering the time period, that's obviously to be expected, so I won't harp on it that much. Now, my knowledge of Japanese film, and especially comedies, is extremely limited, so I have no idea if this style is emblematic of the movies from the country during this time, but as a Lupin film, it's bizarre to say the least. Slapstick is a common element in many Lupin stories, especially in the early days, so it isn't necessarily out of place, but it's odd just how much this movie relies on that style of comedy to get its laughs. As for whether or not it works, that's obviously subjective, but for me, it's very much a mixed bag. There are quite a lot of gags in here that legitimately made me laugh even when watching the movie again, and while it's often too wacky for its own good, it does occasionally hit the mark and hit it hard. It helps that the actors do a great job selling these comedic bits, and even when the gags themselves don't land, the performances do make up for it. But Strange Psychokinetic Strategy isn't a non-stop barrel of laughs, not just because not all the jokes are funny, but because it retains the twisted perversion of the manga, though played through a more comedic lens. It's as mature as the early episodes of Part 1, but not as dark, as it isn't ever trying to be serious even with its adult content. We're still in that early installment weirdness here, where Lupin and the gang have a more carefree attitude towards violence and sexual assault. Not to the extent of the manga, thankfully, but still a lot more callous and unsavory than you might be used to for a Lupin story. To my recollection, this is the last time we'll really have to seriously deal with an attitude like this in the Lupin series for a while, as Part 2 onward tones this down quite a bit, so that's good at least. Of course, being that this is the first live-action Lupin adaptation, you might be wondering who they got to play these roles, which, even just 7 years after the manga's release, were already familiar in Japanese culture. Thankfully, this is one of the areas where Strange Psychokinetic Strategy actually shines, and shockingly well, I might add. Its main quartet of actors surprisingly work really well in their respective roles, and as I said, have good comedic timing in the physical bits. Lupin is portrayed by Yuki Meguro, who you may recognize for his role in the 1983 film Legend of the Eight Samurai. His portrayal of Lupin is a lot more laid back and relaxed, playing a younger version of the character who has the same charisma and intelligence, but not necessarily the aptitude. For a Lupin that's more carefree and reckless, Meguro hits all the right notes, and his physical acting especially really embodies the character. Jigen is portrayed by the late Kunie Tanaka, a prolific actor who's perhaps most well known for his role in the Battles Without Honor and Humanity series, and for being the basis for the One Piece character Kizaru. In this film, Jigen's actually a member of the Lupin Empire who served under Lupin II and is the last remaining member of the organization, filling the role of the mentor rather than Lupin's trusted partner. Personally, I'm not a fan of this interpretation of Jigen, as I never liked when he takes a subservient role to Lupin, but for what they were going for, Tanaka does it very well with the confidence and skill that you'd expect. Fujiko's actress, Hideko Izaki, doesn't have a lot of acting credits as far as I'm aware, but did have a recurring role on the samurai show Uedo Sosamo. This Fujiko was a lot more playful to match the less serious mood of the film, and considering how this Lupin acts and behaves, it makes sense that they'd make this the dynamic between the two. Izaki has the beauty and seductiveness down pat, and while I think Fujiko is somewhat underutilized in this story, the times where she does appear and is an active participant in the plot are very memorable. Finally, Zenigata is portrayed by comedic actor Shiro Ito, famous for his roles in films like The Uchoten Hotel, and this guy is an absolute delight. This Zenigata is very over the top and downright ridiculous, having the most outwardly slapstick performance, especially involving his two bumbling officers who appear in just about every scene with the inspector. Ito nails both the tone of voice with Zenigata's constant angry screaming and the physical comedy with the exaggerated facial expressions and body movements, and he's far and away one of the best parts of the movie. My favorite part is how Zenigata slowly gets covered in more and more bandages over the course of the story, but it's also obvious that he's just faking his injuries for no reason. It's a weird joke, but also a very funny one. It's interesting how, despite the characters not really fitting in line with what you'd expect, the cast does a great job fitting the intended atmosphere that Strange Psychokinetic Strategy wanted to create. You have to set your expectations accordingly, as you're not going to find all the character traits that are prevalent in other Lupin media, but honestly, these actors are all kind of the perfect fit for this material. I only wish the rest of Strange Psychokinetic Strategy was as well done as the casting, because on the whole, the movie's kind of a mess. It's a very amateurish production, a flick that lacks the high budget necessary to create convincing effects and edits. I don't have budget numbers for this movie in front of me, so I can't say just how cheaply this film was made, but it has the air of penny pinching that unfortunately brings this movie down for me quite a bit. Not that you'd expect a comedy from the 70s to look outstanding, mind you, but there's a definite quality gap here that sticks out like a sore thumb. The screenplay, for instance, seems lost in trying to reach for gags and rarely leads to any good dialogue. Whether or not it's the subtitles on the Discotex release, I have no idea, but there's no flow to how any of these characters interact, and sometimes it seems like verbal garbage being chucked at the screen. The characters throw around the word psychokinesis every so often like it's supposed to mean something, and I guess it's to explain all the physically impossible movements that we take for granted in animated features, but that's not good screenwriting if that's the case. Again, to bring up the example of the clay figures which have psychokinetic powers, those powers aren't shown, so what's the point? It only has a purpose in the script because the characters tell us that it does, not because it has an actual reason to exist. Something else that bothered me while rewatching this movie is the cinematography, which is honestly pretty poor. Koji Ichihara is the cinematographer, and from what I can gather, this is his only film credit, and it's not hard to see why. Some of these shots are very poorly framed, never letting us get a proper view of the scene and not showing everything in the right perspective. Whenever there is an interesting shot, it's usually because of the set design, and there are some unique locations for sure, like the concrete drainage pipes and the moving building that becomes the centerpiece for the last action scene. Inventive stuff, but just not presented correctly. The last thing I want to highlight here is the music by the late Masaru Sato, a legendary composer famous for scoring many films by Akira Kurosawa. It continues in the tradition of the soundtrack for the pilot film rather than Part 1's more unique 70s style, not quite hitting the same tones as Yuji Ono's compositions, but heading in that direction. It's generally a decent score, not really a standout soundtrack, but it doesn't get in the way of the scene most of the time, which is important. The sole exception is Lupin's theme, which, unlike the iconic composition that would grace Japanese TV sets 3 years later, is a baffling, farcical tune that fits the movie but not the character we know and love. It's not the most pleasant song, which is why it's super great that this music cue plays 9 times throughout the damn movie, often one right after another and at the most inappropriate times as well. But you know, despite how cheap, ludicrous, and undercooked it is, I can't find it in myself to dislike Strange Psychokinetic Strategy. For every misstep it takes, there's something in here that I genuinely appreciate and makes me glad that I put it on. It is absolutely not a good Lupin movie, and if you expect anything on the level of the anime, you're going to be woefully disappointed. But if you're in the mood for a cheesy 70s comedy that's enjoyable in both intended and unintended manners, you could certainly do a lot worse. I see this more as an oddity in the Lupin canon, groundbreaking in a way for being the first live-action adaptation, but also revealing why the series doesn't really work in live action without major stylistic changes. It'll be interesting to see the other 2 live-action Lupin media and compare them, though we have a long way to go before we get to either one. There's the 2014 movie, on which I've heard a number of reactions ranging from not great to downright awful, and the 2017 Inspector Zenigata TV series, which I've heard is actually pretty decent, but as of right now, I haven't seen either of these yet. So we'll see when I get to those videos in, I don't know, 2024, there's a ton of stuff to cover in between, so who knows. So before this video ends, I wanted to take a bit of time to thank you all for watching the Legacy of Lupin video so far and for expressing your support in the comments and elsewhere. If you didn't know, or maybe you're watching this video later, I got hit with a copyright takedown by TMS, the right holders for the Lupin franchise, and the first 3 videos were inaccessible for a time. I fought back, of course, resulting in the strike being lifted and the videos being restored, but it was a demoralizing, agonizing ordeal for sure. I was fully confident that the videos would be brought back online, but the period of waiting for YouTube to restore the videos while knowing that TMS could pursue legal action if they chose to was excruciating. Obviously, covering an anime series like this, I fully expected to deal with copyright claims and takedowns, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly. It did unfortunately kill a lot of the momentum those first 3 videos had, so I encourage you to please watch those videos even if you have already. Link to the playlist is in the description, or you can click the card here. You probably noticed this video looked different with less footage and more stills to try and get around the copyright snipers. Not a perfect solution, but it should allow me to keep making these videos for the time being. And I really do want to keep making these videos, and that's thanks largely to your support during this whole process. It was very crushing to see my work be taken down in an instant, but all the output and sympathy I received from you guys affirmed to me that these videos are worth doing. I wasn't exactly sure how well these Lupin videos would be received, but the feedback I've gotten from you guys so far has been overwhelmingly positive, so rest assured, even if TMS tries to stop me, I'm pushing through it. That said, there actually won't be another Lupin video until January, as the next Lupin media is part 2, and as you Lupin veterans know, that's a long series with 155 episodes plus 81 dubbed episodes to watch. As I'm writing and recording this video, I'm already partially through watching it again, so I'll be on track to get that video out soon after the new year begins, but I need December to get through the show in addition to all the other videos I'm making. So in the meantime, if you liked this video, give it a like, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe and click that bell to see when new videos go live. Again, I highly encourage you to check out my other Lupin videos, as I've already covered the history of the series and part 1, and there will be many more to come. Until then, I'm Cloud Connection, and thanks for watching.